Master Sergeant Cole called her dead weight. He didn't say it to her face, not on that first day, but the words traveled through the thin plywood walls of the command tent as if he'd used a megaphone. First Lieutenant Anya Sharma, freshly arrived at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, heard them clearly. She stood beside her duffel bag, the oppressive Afghan sun beating down on the gravel lot, and felt the label settle onto her shoulders. It was a familiar weight, one she had carried before. The problem wasn't the insult. The problem was that he was the operational command for the sector she was assigned to liaise with. His opinion, however flawed, mattered. Her assignment was a bureaucratic shuffle. A temporary posting as a civil-military cooperation officer meant to bridge the gap between the combat patrols and the local village elders. To a man like Cole, a grizzled infantry veteran whose world was measured in meters gained and threats neutralized, an officer with a soft skills designation was worse than useless. She was a liability, a distraction, another body to protect. She watched him from a distance as he dismissed her with a wave of his hand to a junior NCO. Find a bunk for the lieutenant. Keep her out of the wire and out of my way. The sergeant didn't know she saw the subtle shift in his stance, the unconscious tightening of his jaw that spoke of a deep-seated contempt for anything that wasn't a trigger puller. He didn't know that she had already mapped the entire FOB in her mind, noting the interlocking fields of fire from the guard towers, the single, vulnerable entrance to the motor pool, and the slight depression in the terrain 60 meters beyond the western perimeter, a perfect defilade for an enemy mortar team. He just saw a small-statured woman with a crisp, new uniform and an Ivy League education mention somewhere in her file. Dead weight. The turning point would come under the incandescent glare of enemy tracers, but for now, she was just a ghost in his periphery, and that was exactly how she preferred it. The official introduction was a formality steeped in condescension. Cole assembled his platoon leaders in the Tactical Operations Center, a cramped space buzzing with the hum of servers and smelling of stale coffee and sweat. The air was thick with testosterone and a weary, coiled tension that permeated everything at FOB Sentinel. Maps covered the walls, marked with red circles over suspected IED locations and patrol routes traced in grease pencil. Listen up, Cole began, his voice a low growl that demanded attention. He gestured vaguely in Anya's direction without looking at her. This is First Lieutenant Sharma. She's our new CIMIC liaison. Her job is to talk to people. A few of the younger sergeants snickered. The implication was clear. While they fought, she would be having tea. He finally turned his gaze on her, his eyes the color of faded slate, hard and unforgiving. Lieutenant, my men have one job: to stay alive and kill anyone trying to change that. Your mission, whatever it is secondary. You will not request assets. You will not alter patrol schedules. You will clear any movement outside the wire with me, personally. And when the shooting starts, you will find the deepest hole you can and stay in it. We don't have the manpower to babysit. Anya met his gaze without flinching. Her posture was relaxed but erect, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She didn't offer a defense or a summary of her qualifications. Arguing with a man like Cole was like wrestling with a rock. It only exhausted you and gave him a better grip. The system had placed her here, and the system was all he respected, even if he despised its decisions. Understood, Master Sergeant, she said. Her voice was calm, even, carrying no trace of insult or defiance. It was a simple statement of fact. She had received his orders. The simplicity of her response seemed to throw him off. He expected indignation, a reference to her rank, perhaps a complaint to the base commander. He was prepared for a fight, and she had given him nothing to strike. He grunted, a sound of dismissal, and turned back to the map. That's all. Get back to your sections. The sergeants filed out, a few of them giving her curious, pitying glances. She was left standing alone in the center of the TOC. Cole ignored her, leaning over the central table to speak with his radio operator. To him, the conversation was over. She was categorized, filed away under irrelevant. He saw a liaison officer. He saw a woman in a man's world. He saw a liability. He never once considered what she saw when she looked at him. A competent, dedicated leader whose tactical awareness was excellent within the wire, but whose strategic vision was fatally narrow. He was focused on the lion in front of him, oblivious to the vipers hidden in the grass all around. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that the vipers were coming. Anya did not retreat to her quarters or the relative safety of the mess hall. Instead, she began her own form of reconnaissance. She walked the perimeter of FOB Sentinel, her pace steady and unremarkable. She carried no clipboard, no notepad, just a bottle of water and an observant gaze that missed nothing. The soldiers in the guard towers watched her make her slow, deliberate circuit. They saw a woman taking a walk. They didn't see the calculations running through her mind. She noted the position of every HESCO barrier, the age of the sandbags showing signs of sunrot, the slight sag in the concertina wire near the southern wall. She mentally timed the rotation of the guards, their patterns predictable, their moments of distraction consistent. She watched Corporal Evans, a young soldier with sharp eyes but a nervous habit of checking his phone, manning the Crow's remote weapons station. He was competent, but his attention was divided. Her observation wasn't limited to the physical defenses. She spent hours in the mess hall not talking, but listening. She learned the platoon dynamics, who the natural leaders were, who the hotheads were, and who was nearing their breaking point. She learned that Sergeant Miller's wife was expecting, that Specialist Diaz was the best shot in the company but terrible at radio procedure, and that Master Sergeant Cole, for all his bluster, personally wrote a letter home for every soldier he lost. He wasn't a monster. He was a shepherd who saw a wolf in anyone who didn't look like his flock. She spent an afternoon at the motor pool, ostensibly inspecting the civilian vehicles used for liaison missions. The mechanics ignored her until she pointed out a subtle asymmetry in the wear on a Land Cruiser's tires, suggesting a damaged axle housing. The chief mechanic, a grizzled staff sergeant named Grease O'Malley, grunted in surprise, checked it, and found she was right. He shot her a look of newfound, if reluctant, respect. "Good eye, Lieutenant. I've spent some time around vehicles," she replied vaguely. She didn't mention that the time was spent identifying subtle signs of BIDEs, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, in crowded markets, where a split-second observation was the difference between life and a crater. Her weapon became an extension of herself. Each evening, as other soldiers relaxed, she would field strip her M4 rifle on her bunk, cleaning every component with a practiced, meditative efficiency. Her movements were fluid, economical, devoid of any wasted motion. Corporal Evans, whose bunk was across the partitioned room, watched her one night. He'd never seen an officer, let alone a liaison officer, maintain their weapon with such obsessive care. It wasn't the act of a soldier following regulations. It was the ritual of a professional who understood her tool intimately. He saw the faint, silvery scars on her knuckles, the kind that didn't come from pushing papers. For the first time, he wondered what the master sergeant was missing. Anya felt his stare but didn't acknowledge it. She was polishing the bolt carrier group, her mind tracing the potential lines of attack, envisioning the chaos, and preparing her response. She was a chess player on a board where everyone else was playing checkers. The pressure began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A local informant, a man who had provided reliable intelligence for months, went silent. A routine patrol returned 3 hours late, their vehicle peppered with small arms fire from an engagement they couldn't explain. They'd been ambushed by shadows, they said, ghosts who fired a few rounds and vanished into the rocky hillsides. The atmosphere at FOB Sentinel grew heavier, the coiled tension tightening into a knot. Cole dismissed the incidents as local friction. He saw them as isolated, harassing attacks, nothing more. "They're testing the fences," he told his sergeants in the evening briefing. "They do it every time a new unit rotates in. We hit back hard on the next patrol. Show them we're not soft." Anya, standing in the back of the TOC as was her custom, remained silent. She saw a pattern Cole was missing. The silent informant, the harassing fire, a sudden increase in radio chatter on encrypted channels they could barely intercept. It wasn't a test. It was a rehearsal. It was the careful, methodical preparation for a coordinated assault. The enemy was probing for weaknesses, gauging their response time, and mapping their defenses. They were setting the stage. The next evening, the pressure escalated. A single 82mm mortar round slammed into the gravel yard, 100 meters from the mess hall. The explosion was a concussive thump that shook the entire base. There was no follow-up, just the single, deafening blast and then an unnerving silence. Panic, sharp and metallic, flared in the air. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting orders and questions that no one could answer. It was a classic tactic. A single round to create chaos, to draw personnel out into the open, to make them predictable. Cole's voice cut through the noise, barking orders over the base-wide radio net. All sectors, report. Tower 3, what's your status? I want eyes on that ridge line now. His response was textbook, by the numbers. He was trying to impose order on a situation designed to defy it. Anya didn't run for cover. She moved with a calm, deliberate purpose toward the operations center. She saw the young radio operator fumbling with his headset, his hands shaking. She saw the fear in the eyes of the junior soldiers sprinting toward the perimeter berms. They were reacting. They weren't thinking. Inside the TOC, Cole was a whirlwind of controlled fury, directing his men, demanding information. Where did that round come from? He yelled. No visual confirmation, Master Sergeant. A voice crackled over the radio. No muzzle flash. No sound report. Anya stood near the entrance, her eyes fixed on the large satellite map of the surrounding area. The round had landed in the center of the yard. It wasn't aimed at a specific target. It was a rangefinder. She traced a line from the point of impact back to the depression she had noted her first day, the 160 meters beyond the western perimeter. It was a perfect match. They weren't just testing the fences. They were zeroing their weapons. The real attack was imminent, and it would come from the west, the sector with the least experienced guards and the weakest field of fire. She looked at Cole, who was still focused on the northern ridgeline, the historical point of attack. He was fighting the last war. The new one was about to begin right behind him. The first wave came 10 minutes later, exactly as Anya had anticipated. It wasn't the frontal assault Cole was preparing for. Instead, a hailstorm of RPGs and machine gun fire erupted from the west, targeting the guard tower and the generator shed. The lights in the TOC flickered and died, plunging them into the emergency red glow of the backup batteries. The server hum died with a pathetic whine. The base's digital eyes and ears were gone. Comms are down, the radio operator shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I've lost contact with Tower 2. Chaos bloomed. In the crimson twilight of the TOC, Cole was a silhouette of rage, trying to command a battle he couldn't see. He was screaming into a dead handset, his training and experience rendered useless by a simple, effective blow to the base's nervous system. While others froze or shouted, Anya moved. There was no hesitation, no debate. Her body acted with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. She grabbed a spare radio from the charging rack, one with an independent battery, and tossed a fresh battery pack to the terrified operator. Get on the platoon analog frequency. Now, she ordered, her voice cutting through his fear like a scalpel. She didn't wait for a reply. She moved to the tactical board, her eyes scanning the last known positions of Cole's squads. The western perimeter was pinned down. The machine gun nest that was supposed to provide suppressing fire was silent. They were being systematically dismantled. Without a word to Cole, she exited the TOC. The air outside was a maelstrom of noise and violence. Tracers, green and red, stitched patterns across the night sky. The continuous, terrifying rattle of machine gun fire was punctuated by the crump of RPG impacts. Soldiers were hunkered behind barriers, firing blindly into the darkness. They were suppressed, reactive, and on the verge of breaking. Anya crouched, letting her eyes adjust. She ignored the chaos, focusing on the source. The enemy fire was disciplined, concentrated. She saw the telltale sign. Puffs of dust kicking up near the berm, a few feet to the left of where the soldiers were aiming. A spotter. There was a spotter with night vision directing the fire from a hidden position, making the machine gun brutally effective. No one else had seen it. They were all focused on the muzzle flashes. She moved low and fast, hugging the shadows of a concrete blast wall. She found Specialist Diaz, the marksman, frantically trying to clear a jam in his rifle. "Diaz," she said, her voice a low, urgent command. He flinched, startled. "Give me your rifle." He stared at her, confused. "Lieutenant, your rifle." Now there was no room for argument in her tone. He handed it over. She cleared the jam in 3 swift, practiced movements. She didn't look through the advanced scope. She didn't need it. She rested the barrel on the blast wall, her breathing slowing, becoming rhythmic. She watched the muzzle flashes, watched the impact of the rounds triangulating. 1 breath in. Hold. 1 breath out. She saw a flicker of movement, a glint of light that didn't belong, the reflection from an optic lens. It was 200 meters out, nestled in a rocky outcrop no one had thought to clear. She didn't fire a burst. She didn't waste ammunition. She squeezed the trigger once. A single, precise shot that was swallowed by the din of the battle. Across the field, the brutally effective machine gun fire faltered, then stopped completely. The pressure on the western wall vanished as if a switch had been flipped. Anya handed the rifle back to the stunned Specialist Diaz. "Get back in the fight," she said, and melted back into the shadows before anyone could process what had just happened. The lull was temporary, but decisive. With the enemy's key weapon silenced, the soldiers on the western perimeter regained fire superiority. The initial wave of the attack receded, melting back into the darkness. A tense, ringing silence descended, broken only by the crackle of fires and the shouts of squad leaders taking inventory of their men. Inside the TOC, the emergency generator roared to life, casting the room in a harsh, fluorescent glare. The primary comms flickered back on. Reports started flooding in, painting a picture of a coordinated, nearly catastrophic assault. Master Sergeant Cole stood over the radio, his face grim. He'd regained control, but the sweat on his brow spoke of how close they had come to being overrun. "Tower 2 is back up," the operator announced. "Sergeant Miller reports heavy fire but no casualties. They say the primary machine gun nest just stopped." Cole grunted. "They probably ran out of ammo or got lucky." He turned his attention back to reorganizing the perimeter defense, but a seed of doubt had been planted. The timing was too perfect. Then Specialist Diaz's voice came over the platoon net, shaky but clear. "TOC, this is Diaz. Be advised. I think the lieutenant just took out an enemy spotter. Single shot. 200 meters. The MG went silent right after. The TOC went quiet. Every eye turned to the doorway where Anya had disappeared. Cole froze, his hand hovering over the map. He looked at the radio operator as if to confirm what he'd heard. The operator just nodded, his expression one of pure astonishment. Cole walked to the entrance and peered into the smoky darkness. He saw Anya across the yard, calmly helping a medic apply a pressure dressing to a wounded soldier's leg. She moved with an unnerving efficiency, her hands steady, her voice low and reassuring. She didn't look like a hero. She didn't look like a warrior. She looked like a doctor performing a routine procedure. He walked over to her, his boots crunching on spent shell casings. The medic, seeing him approach, faltered for a second. Cole ignored him. His eyes were locked on Anya. "Diaz is running his mouth," Cole said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an invitation for her to deny it, to give him a rational explanation that fit his worldview. Anya finished tying off the bandage and looked up at him. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes were clear. "The enemy fire was too accurate for undirected suppression," she stated simply. "They had a spotter with optics calling impacts. I neutralized the threat." There was no pride in her voice. No hint of "I told you so." She delivered the information with the dispassionate clarity of an after-action report. The logic was undeniable. The result was self-evident. Cole stood there, the foundation of his judgment beginning to crack. He had seen her as a bureaucrat, a piece of administrative dead weight. But bureaucrats didn't make 200-meter shots in the dark under heavy fire to save a defensive position. Warriors did. He stared at her, a war of confusion and grudging respect playing out on his face. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Lieutenant?" "I've had some training," she said, before turning her attention back to the wounded soldier. The conversation, as far as she was concerned, was over. Cole was left standing in the middle of the yard, the title he had given her, dead weight, echoing in his mind, sounding more foolish and hollow by the second. The battle was far from over. The first assault had been a feint, a sophisticated probe designed to draw out and fix their defenses. The real attack began an hour later, a brutal, multi-pronged assault from 3 directions at once. Mortar rounds began to walk their way across the base, their explosions methodical and terrifyingly precise. The enemy had used the first attack to range every key structure in the compound. This was no longer a skirmish. It was a determined effort to annihilate FOB Sentinel. Master Sergeant Cole was in his element, a roaring vortex of command in the center of the storm. He moved from sector to sector, shoring up defenses, reallocating ammunition, and inspiring his men with a raw courage that bordered on reckless. He was leading from the front, exactly where his men needed him to be. It was also where the enemy wanted him to be. As he directed fire from a hastily fortified position near the southern berm, a sniper's round, fired from an impossible distance, slammed into the concrete wall next to his head, showering him with fragments. A second round hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. The command net erupted in panic. Alpha 6 is hit. I repeat, Alpha 6 is down. The loss of Cole was like a punch to the gut of the base's defense. He was their anchor, and now he was cut loose. The young lieutenant, who was his second in command, froze, his voice on the radio hesitant and unsure. The defensive fire slackened, becoming ragged and uncoordinated. The enemy, sensing the faltering command, pressed their advantage. Mortar fire intensified on Cole's last known position, pinning down anyone who tried to reach him. Anya heard the call from the TOC. She saw the command structure crumbling. This was the critical moment, the inflection point where the battle would be won or lost. She had a choice. Follow Cole's final order and stay in the deepest hole she could find, or step into the void he had left. It was no choice at all. She sprinted from the relative safety of the aid station, weaving through explosions and streams of tracer fire. She moved not like a soldier running for cover, but like a predator, using every shadow, every piece of debris, to mask her advance. She reached the southern berm and found 2 soldiers desperately trying to drag the bleeding, semi-conscious Cole to safety. They were trapped, caught in a lethal crossfire. "Get his legs!" she yelled over the din. She grabbed Cole under his arms, her small frame straining with the effort, and helped haul him behind a burned-out Humvee. Cole was conscious, his face pale, his teeth gritted in pain. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with agony and disbelief. "What are you doing?" he gasped. "Master Sergeant, what's the primary target for the mortars?" she asked, ignoring his question. Her voice was sharp, clinical. "The TOC, the ammo depot," he managed to say. "They're bracketing them," she said, her eyes already scanning the darkness. "It's a feint. They want us to think they're hitting high-value targets. They're actually using the mortars to screen their advance. They're coming through the wire. Section Bravo." Cole's eyes widened. Section Bravo was the weakest point, a section of the perimeter damaged in the first attack and only partially repaired. He hadn't thought of it. He'd been too focused on the obvious targets. Anya grabbed the radio from the lieutenant's trembling hand. She keyed the command channel. Her voice was unrecognizable from the quiet liaison officer. It was hard, resonant, and utterly confident. "All call signs, this is Watchdog. Alpha 6 is down but conscious. I am assuming tactical command." She didn't use her rank. She used an old, unofficial call sign, one that held no meaning for anyone here. "Shift all fire to grid sector 4 Bravo 7. They are breaching the wire under the cover of the mortar barrage. Every gun you have, fire for effect. Now, there was a moment of hesitation on the net. Who was watchdog? But her certainty, the sheer force of her command, cut through the chaos. One by one, squad leaders began to respond. Roger, watchdog, shifting fire. On the way, the defensive fire of FOB Sentinel, which had nearly collapsed, now roared back to life, redirected with surgical precision not by a master sergeant, but by the woman he had dismissed as dead weight. She wasn't just in the fight. She was the fight. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The concentrated fire from every heavy weapon on the base tore into Sector Bravo, catching the main enemy assault force as they were funneling through the breach in the wire. The darkness was lit by secondary explosions as RPGs and satchel charges carried by the attackers were hit. The assault shattered. From the command bunker at the main airfield miles away, High Command had been monitoring Sentinel's failing comms with growing alarm. They saw the command structure collapse when Cole went down, and they were preparing to write the FOB off as a loss. Then, a new voice emerged from the static, a calm, authoritative presence that took control and turned the tide in seconds. The base commander, a full-bird colonel, leaned into the mic. FOB Sentinel. This is Archangel. Identify the call sign watchdog. Who is in command? There was a pause. Over the net, Anya's voice returned, still calm, but now tinged with the weariness of the fight. Archangel, this is Lieutenant Anya Sharma. I have temporary command. A stunned silence filled the high command bunker. The colonel turned to his intelligence officer. Get me Lieutenant Sharma's file. Now. The file was thin, heavily redacted. It showed her CIMIC training, her language qualifications, her advanced degrees. It looked exactly like the file of a liaison officer. But the intelligence officer, a man trained to look for what wasn't there, ran her service number through a different, more restricted database. He went pale. He turned back to the colonel. Sir, Lieutenant Sharma's file is a cover. A deep one. Her real designation is classified above this command's level. But I'm getting a flag. A call sign associated with her service number. What is it? The colonel demanded. Spectre. The officer whispered, as if the word itself was dangerous. She was Spectre lead. Task Force 11. They were a hunter-killer unit. Officially, they don't exist. The colonel stared at the tactical map, where the assault on Sentinel was now visibly collapsing. Task Force 11 was a ghost story, a legend whispered among special operations forces. They were the people sent in when armies failed, a scalpel in the dark. They were operators of the highest possible tier, trained in everything from direct action to strategic infiltration. And their leader, Spectre, was said to be the most effective and elusive of them all. They had sent a legend to FOB Sentinel to act as a liaison officer, and no one had known. Lying behind the Humvee, drifting in and out of consciousness, Master Sergeant Cole heard the exchange over the radio still clutched in the young lieutenant's hand. He heard the name Sharma. He heard the impossible orders she had given. And then he heard the whispered name that echoed from the command net, a name that made his blood run cold. Spectre. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her unnerving calm, her methodical observation, the impossible shot that took out the spotter, her immediate, flawless diagnosis of the complex attack. The way she had taken command as if born to it. He hadn't been dismissing a lieutenant. He had been lecturing a master of the craft. The dead weight he had scorned was, in fact, the most lethal asset in his entire area of operations. The shepherd had mistaken the sheepdog for a poodle, and that sheepdog had just saved his entire flock. He closed his eyes, the physical pain of his wound eclipsed by a wave of profound, staggering humility. In the gray light of dawn, the aftermath of the battle was stark. The perimeter was a ruin of shattered Hescos and twisted metal. The bodies of the attackers lay where they had fallen, a testament to the ferocity of the defense Anya had orchestrated. The siege was broken. FOB Sentinel had held. Anya spent the next few hours in a blur of quiet, efficient action. She organized the casualty collection points, directed the resupply of ammunition to the depleted guard posts, and gave a clear, concise after-action report to the colonel over the secure line. She handled the complex, messy aftermath of combat with the same dispassionate competence she had displayed during the fight. When the medevac helicopter arrived for Cole and the other seriously wounded, she personally ensured he was secured for transport. He was lucid now, stabilized by the medics. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, he looked up at her. The arrogance and dismissal were gone from his eyes, replaced by something deep and unsettling to him. Awe. "Sharma," he started, his voice rough. "Rest, Master Sergeant," she said, cutting him off gently. "They'll take good care of you." She wasn't interested in apologies or acknowledgments. The mission was complete. That was all that mattered. In the days that followed, a quiet but profound change settled over FOB Sentinel. The story of what had happened spread like wildfire. They didn't know the name Spectre, but they knew that the quiet liaison officer had saved them all. The snickers were replaced by silent nods. The looks of pity turned to expressions of deep respect. When she walked into the mess hall, conversations didn't stop, but they lowered in volume, a subconscious gesture of deference. The public moment of recognition came a week later. Cole, his arm in a sling and his shoulder heavily bandaged, had insisted on returning to the FOB against medical advice. He said he had unfinished business. He found Anya supervising the repair of the western perimeter, pointing out a design flaw in the placement of a new machine gun nest. She was back in her role as an observer, a planner. The warrior had receded. The quiet officer returned. Cole walked directly up to her. The work crew, seeing him, slowly came to a halt. Every soldier on that section of the wall turned to watch. The air grew still. He stopped 2 paces in front of her. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there, his one good arm stiff at his side, and brought himself to the rigid, formal position of attention. Then, slowly, with deliberate precision, Master Sergeant Cole, a man who had not saluted a junior officer outside of a formal ceremony in 15 years, raised his hand to his brow. It was a perfect textbook salute. It was not a gesture demanded by regulation. It was an offering, a surrender of pride, an apology and a thank you, all rendered in a single silent motion. For a long moment, Anya simply looked at him. She saw the pain in his eyes, not from his wound, but from the shattering of his own certainties. She returned the salute, her own movements crisp and economical. Their eyes met. In that shared gaze, an entire volume of understanding passed between them. The salute was lowered. The debt was paid. The closure came not in a grand ceremony, but in the quiet rhythms of daily life. The legend of Spectre remained a classified secret, but the reality of Lieutenant Sharma, the quiet officer who saw everything and moved with purpose, became the new foundation of FOB Sentinel's culture. Her presence was no longer questioned. It was valued. Her suggestions were no longer ignored. They were implemented immediately. The dead weight had become the cornerstone. One evening, Anya stood on the repaired western wall, looking out at the rugged landscape as the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon. It was the same view she had studied on her first day, but now she saw it not as a collection of threats, but as a space she had successfully defended. The silence was peaceful, earned. Corporal Evans walked up beside her, holding 2 steaming mugs. He offered one to her without a word. She took it, the warmth seeping into her hands. They stood there for a minute, watching the last of the light fade. "Ma'am," Evans said finally, his voice full of a respect that went far beyond rank. "We were wondering, the men and I, how did you know about the attack coming from the west?" Anya took a slow sip of the coffee. She thought about explaining the nuanced intelligence, the pattern analysis, the subtle tells of a prepared assault. She thought about detailing the psychological profile of the local insurgent commander, a man known for his complex misdirections. Instead, she gave a simpler, more honest answer. "You watch," she said, her gaze fixed on the darkening hills. "You listen, and you learn to see what's really there, not just what you expect to see." Evans nodded slowly, understanding the lesson was far deeper than just tactics. He looked at her, no longer seeing a small woman or a liaison officer, but a guardian. He saw the quiet strength that had held them all together when everything was falling apart. She finished her coffee and handed the empty mug back to him. "Your fire discipline has improved, Corporal. Keep it up." A simple word of praise from her now carried more weight than a medal from a general. He straightened up. "Yes, ma'am." She gave him a final, small nod and walked away down the perimeter line, a solitary figure silhouetted against the last vestiges of twilight. She wasn't a hero hungry for glory or an operator seeking validation. She was just Spectre, a ghost doing her job, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of safety and the quiet, unshakable respect of the men she had saved.